Hi. Hi, everyone. So since I already got this perfect introduction, I think I can skip the first 20 slides or so. Let's go into this. I work with SoundCloud. I've been working with SoundCloud for 6 years, best 6 years of my life. Much of what I'm presenting here is going to be telling from my experience there, but also of my experience talking to other companies about their security and consulting them, and some consulting jobs that I did before that. As Magdalene already introduced, I had the security org at SoundCloud. That's 4 different teams. The security team that deals with network security, infrastructure security, and application security. User auth, that does everything to do with authentication and authorization of users. Anti-abuse and corporate IT. 12 people are on my teams in total, and I'm certainly proud to say that 40% of them are female. I am less proud to say that that is really the only diversity that this team has to offer. Other than we're from 7 different countries. That's also pretty cool. So I'm going to ask up front, because really I'm giving this talk for you and not for my own viewing pleasure or speaking pleasure. I wonder how many of you do work for a company today that does not, where the main product isn't security, that's not a sheer security company? Okay. How many of you probably work in a position where you're building a security team, or you're starting to, wanting to? One of them, 2 of them. What are all the rest of you doing in this talk? Okay, you two, I ask you to shout out questions any point in time. I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly, because I think that the beginning of them might not be so interesting to you. But if you have a question you want me to slow down, then I'm going to look at you two, because you should be the ones that benefit the most of this. Okay, without further ado, I believe that security is not a team. Many other people have said that before me. I didn't come up with this. But at a certain size of company, you will be asked whether you have a security team. That doesn't happen while you're 2 friends in your garage. You probably both do or do not care about security to a certain extent. 12 people start up, I would expect that most of you do. This one? Is it that? Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. Much harder to get on. Thank you. Okay. So here, most of the people still care about security to a certain extent, right? There's only that much you consider security as you're starting up a company that probably will never be. At the point that you reach around 80 people in my experience, you're probably partnering in your business with other businesses. You have some investors that do become more and more interested in your compliance with things. People start asking the question whether you have a security team. And more there will be some people that crystallize out of your other teams that will probably form into, well, a group of people that at least discuss security when problems come up. But it's certainly not going to be the whole of the company anymore. There is some overlap that these people will have with existing teams. That's going to be a large overlap maybe at that phase with systems engineering. So the people that set up your servers, probably the people that set up how you deploy to these servers. There's a fairly large overlap with traffic engineering. Even if you just think of a random DOS, this is where that overlap comes from. And then there's a much more smaller overlap with your diverse product engineering teams. If you think of the difference between, say, you have a team that works on recommendations or search, they might have some interest in an anti-spam like exchange. But unless you're thinking of a team that deals with monetization and payments, there's going to be very little overlap with security. And this is where problems begin to start. So there's a lot of aspects in security, right? I mentioned a couple of them that my teams deal with before. And it's hard to find a single person that can cover all of these, right? Who's proficient in network security and infrastructure security and application security and product security, data security, whatever. And then, as I said, 80 people upwards, come all of the questions that externals tend to ask you, right? Like these are probably your internal areas of security that you focus on, but then externals come in and they're like, well, what about the contractual obligations, right? All of the security white papers that you have to sign, some legal compliance, probably payments compliance with PCI, or risk management in general. Every time that you get an investment, you will be asked, do you have a security team? And you're like, oh yeah, we have this one dude who sits right next to the systems engineers. He does all of our security. It's the worst thing to say. Never say that. Also, if you want to hire somebody, never say that. As I said, that's very hard to cover by one individual. These unicorns barely exist. Also don't want to talk about unicorns so much. But you will have to hire someone, right? So I guess the question is, who do you hire if you don't find someone with all of this in their skill set? There have been various suggestions made to me over the course of my career as to where other people hire from or what we could hire from. Some of them were academic background, security researchers. That starts with, the people that do the bug hunting, pen testers, or consultants you get into, outright malicious people. I should say that I would recommend that you leave the academic and the outright malicious people probably to leave to Google to hire. You might hire out of the security community. We've done something like that in the past where we have made offers or invited people that participate in our bug bounty program to work with us. I've seen other companies run bug bounties and like specific hack days, specifically with the purpose of hiring all of these, both of these companies have stopped doing this because of the very minimal output that gave them. But one thing that I've encountered that has made an incredibly large difference to us at SoundCloud anyways, is internal hires. So people that do not come from a security background, but they're getting more interested in security, and they already know about all of the internals in your company. And it turns out it is much easier to teach somebody about, say, the technologies that we use in the security teams, than teaching them about the raw skills that we really need as a security team. And these skills have very, very little to do with all of the areas of focus, technicalities that I listed before. And they have a lot to do with understanding what the risks for your specific business really are. And my personal checklist, therefore, starts with not anything technical, like there's barely anything technical on there. It starts with empathy, as I believe that as your security team, as security as a topic that reaches into so many areas of your organization, touches so many teams in your organization, moves more and more to the perception of the rest of the organization to be one team, and you're like, well, these people are responsible for, making the application more secure, making sure that we don't get owned. If these people then become largely operational and draw the same boundary to the rest of the organization, they're not helping anyone, they're not helping themselves, even more so. So the first and foremost trait to look for in any person you hire into a security team might be empathy. There's passion certainly for security. There's also hiring people that are smarter than you, because you already have you. A certain service-orientedness, which comes a lot of the times just with the empathy, right? You don't have a security team, you don't build a security team in order to check that one checkbox that your investor asked you about. Do you have a security team? Yes, I have a security team. Only costs us $80,000 a year. You do it because you really want to service your organization. You want to service your business, and you don't want your business to go out of business. Lastly, one thing that you should always hire for, regardless of which time you hire, is the thing that we don't call culture fit anymore, because, again, you don't want to hire yourself. You already have yourself. You want to add to the culture of the company and to the culture of the team. One thing you should not hire for, therefore, is ODA. So a friend of mine coined this term of hiring for empathy, not ODA. And that is simply because that is something that people can learn. And the minute you start hiring people internally or engaging people internally, at least for the length of a project, that is also something you want the rest of the organization to learn. That there's absolutely, absolutely, absolutely no magic sauce in any of the stuff that we do, right? There's no magic sauce in ML, and there's also no magic sauce in security. There's no magic sauce in front-end JavaScript development. No magic sauce anywhere. It's just another trait that you learn. It's just another technology that you learn. And the more we perpetuate this idea of we have all the magic and this is why we get paid double as much as anyone else, and it serves us well, has served well over the last years, I think the less we're going to get help from anyone else in an organization or in a business that doesn't focus on security alone. Lastly, you should hire people that are self-aware, because this is how they're really going to learn to be part of an organization, and more so that will learn to be part of an organization that is diverse and challenges inclusion, not challenges, fosters inclusion. So let's say you found all of these people. Really, it's not so hard. There's empathetic people out there. They're good. So you find these people. You have a team. Now the much bigger challenge is to connect them with the rest of the organization. As I said earlier, there's a certain overlap with other teams. It's going to be very specific per team. And we want them to work well together, right? You don't want the security team to be perceived as the people that every time that there's a problem, they come storming in, they rip somebody's laptop off the cable, shut it, and run back out, right? We've done that. That happens, but you don't want that to be the rule, right? Like, that's not what you normally want to engage in. And that is just one example to give, as you don't want any of the FUD, right? Like, don't want any fear, you don't want any uncertainty, you don't want any doubt. You want people to feel unable to make secure choices themselves. You're not going to be the person who makes all the choices for them, because otherwise you're going to end up writing all of the code, you're going to be the one deploying all of the code, you're going to be the one basically running yourself into a burnout first. So the way we connect our teams with the rest of the organization is through a multitude of channels, but also different stages of let's say, engineers or any employee's life cycle inside SoundCloud. One of the things I think that the security team contributes the most to their product and their thinking is adversarial thinking, and that's something we can also teach the rest of the organization. They don't need us for that. It doesn't require specialized knowledge, that only requires the experience of it. And also the fact that they should feel that care for the safety of your users or of your employees' data themselves, right? You shouldn't take that from them. That should be something that the organization owns. And so we do that through a multitude of ways. One of them is risk reviews. You can call them architecture reviews. That also includes code reviews. It's just a much larger picture, right? You can do a risk review with the team and looks at all of their services and how likely it is that they're going to cause them any problems. You're going to look into team partnerships where you're like, I think that there could be a benefit in building this new testing setup. It's not necessarily for security, but I think that it's going to benefit security if we could run some tests there. And then you basically lend out somebody from your team to another team to form a new partnership and work on a project that they're working on to ensure that it has security in their focus. You push for security-informed KPIs. Everyone familiar with the term KPI? Key process indicator. Performance process. Key performance indicator. So oftentimes other teams would have these KPIs that they report on, right? How many people did you funnel to make a payment, right? Or how many people have used this particular feature of the site in the last month? You want to ensure that these KPIs are also security informed or anti-abuse informed, right? If someone is just like, how many users did sign up, that doesn't really exclude how many of these users weren't real people, right? You want them to be making informed choices for their KPIs. And you want to define accountabilities so that it's not the security team that is responsible for all of the security, is certainly responsible, but not accountable for the security of other teams' code bases, for example, or products. Lastly, which really is firstly, I'm going to turn this around in a second, there's the education that goes with the entire, as I said, life cycle or career cycle of somebody who works with us and doesn't work necessarily on the security team. What you get back from them, on the other hand, is going to be evangelism for your cause, which would be security. And again, no fear, uncertainty, and doubt. If you don't introduce any of that, you're not getting any of that back. Nobody's going to come running at you and being like, oh my God, the world is ending, when really it isn't. So coming back to that education point, the way we start with introducing security as part of the culture to the rest of the organization is as we do onboarding. At SoundCloud, people go through a week of onboarding where they learn all kinds of things about the company. 3 of these classes they go to are security or compliance related. And it doesn't really start there. They get more videos to watch at home, basically. There's annual tests that follow up from that. But there's also trainings that occur throughout the year that they are free to sign up for themselves if they have interest. And what we've learned from not forcing it onto people is that they actually do have interest. Right? If you don't constantly scare them that this is something extremely high level they'll never understand, then that is actually something they're interested in. Of course, you have to tell people about the services that you provide to them, otherwise they're not going to use them. You're curating documentation, right? You're doing everything that makes it possible that other people can help themselves. So you want to reach the point where your entire security team, whether it's 1 person or 12 people or whatever, can go on vacation collectively for a week, and everyone's going to be fine because they know how to help themselves. They know how to apply adversarial thinking themselves, etc. When something happens, so you can have all the documentation in the world, you won't come up with every single case of a failure scenario that you can prevent. We write postmortems. When I say great postmortems, really what I mean is blameless postmortems. This isn't about who let us down, who deployed this one change that made the site go down. This is rather about how did we react to that happening, because somebody might learn from the reaction, not from the fact that it happened, but how did we bring the site back up. You can recommend further educational resources that are outside of those of your own company or business, which makes a lot of sense because it takes an enormous amount of time to compile the educational resources internally. And then, as I said before, you teach adversarial thinking, whether you do that hands-on, as in you run some hack days yourself, or you do that hands-off by, say, running trainings about the current OWASP top 10, or rather the last OWASP top 10 maybe, is gonna ensure this engagement, this education that you're looking for in somebody who you want to talk to on the same level about security. What you're going to build internally as a security team then is less of this reactionary stance and more of a stance towards giving guidance or providing education again, which should be as concrete as possible. Again, you want people to feel that they are in control of their own decisions because they have been given everything to make these decisions. They should own security of their own products because you're never going to scale to do that yourself. One example that I can give for us is that this is how we teach about code reviews at SoundCloud. Again, I didn't come up with this. It's from somebody else. This is by what stages we challenge a particular pull request, a particular change in code. First and foremost, of course, there's correctness of the code. But the very second layer of what we review when we review somebody else's change is whether or not that is secure, right? And after that comes everything else. And that is something that is ingrained in the culture of code reviews that we have. Other things you can build that would help you build this path of least resistance is something such as static code analysis that's integrated in your continuous integration or continuous deployment system. Automated warnings that could be sent to the teams individually, running tests against business critical security components. So say at SoundCloud, we don't want that a private track is ever available to somebody who's not logged in and the owner of that track. That might be a test, one of the top 10 risk tests that we run externally. Doesn't necessarily mean that that is necessarily the ownership of the security team to work on this, but the risk is something that we do own and that we do communicate. And so the communication of all of these tools and what they output to us and making that visible is really critical. Again, offering internal and external code audits simply because you're not going to scale to all the code audits that might be asked from you the minute that somebody feels comfortable with you reviewing their code, because you're not, slashing left and right, saying that, this all doesn't work, what did you even think? But because it's a cooperative approach to making something more secure that that person, that developer themselves, wants to be more secure. All in all, that means building carrots and not sticks, right? Never enunciate this feeling of fear towards the rest of the organization. And that leads us to the point where we started always saying yes. So I can't recall the last time that we tried to introduce any change to which I would have said no, or anyone on my team would have said no. And that leads to the fact that people actually come and ask us about how we feel about a certain topic, right? At the point that they're not afraid that you're just going to be like, no. This is where they're going to feel as if you say, but there's something that they can learn from this and that they can use in order to strengthen their own security-informed KPIs, right? So as you get to the situation, and I think we've all been there, and I get to the situation multiple times a week where I'm like, oh my God, like, how did anyone, I stop myself and I'm like, I certainly do not have all of the information, right? Because, well, I might be a security professional and I've worked in security for a long time. I haven't worked in business development, right? Like, I haven't worked, I've worked with payment applications for a long time, but I haven't seen everything, right? There's specialists that work specifically with this. And very likely they are the people that know best as to why they're introducing a certain change, right? Why they want a certain product to be built. So it's absolutely not the security team's business to think that they're the ultimate voice of reason whenever a new change has to be deployed. So that takes a lot of self realization of your biological being programmed to pattern match and being like, oh my God, I've seen this before, I know everything about this, this is going to be terrible. So the no perception might be killing you, which is why you try to understand the risks as much as the benefits of a solution that's presented to you. When you're at the point that they're like, that really, I don't think it's a great idea, right? Like there's something off with this. You don't tell them that this is shit, right? You don't tell them the what. They probably already know that this isn't the greatest choice ever. You're gonna tell them a story about why that isn't great, right? They might already have that feeling that it's not, but they don't know how to change it because they don't know about the why. Why would you be saying no to anything, right? And the minute you start telling them the story in a language that they understand, they will find a new what. You don't have to come up with the what, right? And again, this is something that helps you scale to a larger organization. Another thing that has helped us greatly in this communication challenge, where we might be using different language sometimes, we might be jumping to telling them the conclusion, is how we communicate things. Say we receive a responsible disclosure from an external researcher to do with something that the web team is working on. We're simply forwarding that to the web team. There's going to be a lot of FUD in there because obviously that external researcher wants to get on the Hall of Fame regardless of how completely unexploitable their self-XSS is. It's going to contain a lot of abbreviations that will make anyone who reads it and doesn't recall them from memory right away feel stupid. And it doesn't give anyone any measure of comparison to why this is now more important or less important than this other thing that they were working on, that they had planned in their sprint, right? So one thing that we introduced that we use on everything, it's on every post-mortem, it's on every responsible disclosure, is a dread score. Put a dread score on everything. It doesn't even matter what it has already any security vulnerabilities detected in it, that is something that we put on any feature that we develop in order to know what could happen if something was to happen. And it being able to communicate amongst teams and to their managers. And again, as I pointed out before, you want to make an impact on the culture of the organization more so than on individual people. So you never resort back to putting blame on anyone. Maybe just to the dread squares, we do break them down into 3 levels, basically high, medium, low. But we give people the knowledge about how to compute them themselves, so they again feel ownership about making that choice of a prioritization themselves. When do you build all of these things, right? We'll have to think about what we build as a security team. Again, regardless of whether you're 1 people or 12 people, you'll always feel as if you're too little people. And there's never enough time to build anything. I think that's just standard, right? There's any job that's not security specific. So this slide is more about how you prioritize for teams. Also, security teams tend to be very operational. If you feel like you've fallen behind a lot of times, and that's where you're catching up. You do try to implement oftentimes logging or measures to get some visibility about what is happening in certain parts of your application. And then the application changes a lot, right? Your security team is probably a 20th or a 25th part of the entirety of the organization. A lot of change going on everywhere else. Teams changes as fast as code changes, maybe depending on the business. In our business, they change every 3 weeks. We have a new team. And then the auditing itself hasn't secured anything yet, right? Like even if we have these risk reviews, there must be some time to fix the things that do come up during this time as well. Lastly, KPIs are hard. They're hard for everyone. They're especially hard for security teams, for reactive teams. And then law is hard. We have a whole lot of overlap with legal teams. That isn't all of the challenges, right? You might have your own. This is just the top challenges for us. This is where we're running out of space. So the solution that you apply to this constant feeling of overwhelmedness of, you're having a security team maybe right now, it's very operational, tries to catch up, but everything constantly changes. Then you're also trying to build certain infrastructure that you can rely on, that you can fall back on. Then you hear this talk. I give you some advice as to what to do. Somebody else gives you some other advice what to do. There's definitely enough to do. So there's tons of solutions, but the one solution that I think you should take away is that you can't work on all of them at once. And it doesn't even matter so much which one you start with. What does matter is that your team feels that the one thing that you start with is purposeful. It's not for you as a manager to decide, that is for the team to decide. And so as a team, they should learn to prioritize as much as to plan for a certain outlook. When we talk generally in infrastructure teams or in any engineering teams about how much time to reserve for technical debt resolution, so working on any tech that has built up over the years. Oftentimes we use this magical value of 30%. I've seen it in most companies I went to. Maybe yours is different. That is as much time as I also generally spend to tell the team that they should dedicate on research, because if they're not doing any, they're constantly implementing a sort of outdated reactive measure, right? They're not implementing what they have researched is actually going forward the best solution. And then, as I already said, once they have prioritized, once you have bugged them enough so they have prioritized, they work on one thing at a time, because they do need the feeling of working as a team. As much as I would encourage anyone to have individuals on the team work very closely with other teams in the organization and bond up with them and help them with their projects, and they have to come back together and work together on one thing at a time to not feel overwhelmed. Automation, I don't think I have to tell anyone about this. Everyone already knows this. Maybe again, coming back to the point of FUD, no FUD. The other thing that's really important for everyone on your team to know, apart from how to prioritize, and that they are the ones who prioritize, is to know exactly that line between shit is hitting the fan and the house burning down, because shit is hitting the fan all the time. And for many other product teams that we have, they have learned over the time that we have tried to push security more and more into the culture of engineering, and now also in the culture of business, that they can help themselves as long as they don't freak out. They have all the tools. There's no magic that we can provide, even if they called us in. This is like we'd be doing practically what they'd be doing. It helps everyone to calm down when there's some shit hitting the fan, being like, what is the best approach we can take, and communicate about what that approach is, instead of taking that back into like a dark chamber of security nerds and being like, I came up with this thing, it's all done now. Or not. And knowing when the house is really burning down, you have to run with whatever you have. Yes. One thing I do with the security team as well is scheduling end of month wrap-ups with the team. Basically, we only go over the same 3 points over and over and over again. I can't recommend highly enough to do the same things over and over and over again. Say the same things over and over again. There's another slide that has another over and over and over again point. The end of month wrap-ups basically contain 3 questions. That is, what did we facepalm over the last month? And that sounds very strong, but we really only facepalm. Again, we don't say no, but there is a brief moment of facepalming when something happens. So which facepalms do we encounter? The second one is what we believe, therefore, is gonna hit our business devastatingly in the upcoming month, in next month. And then thirdly, whether we're still working on the right thing, because we're working on one thing, to make that not happen, right? Make SoundCloud be around for another month. You know, you enter your company name. You don't have to care about us so much. Did I jump something? No, I think it's fine. So outside of your own team, as a manager of that team, you have a similar role where you repeat the same thing over and over again. And one of them is teaching other people to ask the same questions over and over again as you do. That question could be as simple as, have you considered the security implications of this, right? So one thing that our old COO used to say at every one of the board meetings that I wouldn't be present in is, whenever something new came up, have you considered the security implications of this? It's a very simple question, but through erosion of mind over time, people start asking this question themselves, right? And they do hold each other accountable if they haven't. Curating a risk matrix with them, so with them being your business leadership. Again, this is in order to ensure that everyone feels ownership about those topics that you provide specialist knowledge for, but that aren't your sole accountability. They're the accountability of who runs the business or who runs that product. And then making sure that security has a seat at the table where all of these things are discussed. Probably the harder point if you have a brand new security team. Like any team would own their own security-informed KPIs, we also let our teams own their own data flow diagrams. We teach them about how to make a data flow diagram in onboarding. That's one of the educational resources that I mentioned before. By the way, you don't have to take pictures of these slides, so they're online. You can have them online. And threat models that they build on top of these data flow diagrams. So they can keep them as artifacts. Again, this is material that they can use to onboard somebody new onto their teams. I'll show you what one of these risk assessments looks like. This is really all that a team signs up for themselves. They do that once annually. And we ask the team to choose their own risk level. That's not something that we force onto them. Over time, they learn how risky their products are and how they can understand and deal with that risk. How you then measure success for your team, as much as for other teams, like you can help other teams find the right KPIs. Security team KPIs are really hard. I've seen the approach of KRs, so key risk indicators. I've seen the approach of simply just using an NPS score internally, like how happy are you working with the security team? Only gets you that far. So one thing or a couple things that you might want to start with if this is a fresh team is the number of security incidents that hit a certain threshold, right? Again, if you have a culture of postmortems in your business, then that might be this score or the dread score of any other score that you implement that the team communicates risk via. You can go over logging coverage, so how much of the traffic that's going on your production network, how much of the traffic is going on the internal network, how much of the application logs, of the authentication logs, whatever it is, have you covered, or how large a percentage of the staff of the company you work with has gone through training. So these are all fairly simple to track, and you have something to track. And it's really important to track things, because if we go back here, here, give your team a purpose that is worthwhile. That is what makes it worthwhile, right? They do want to see this echo of, yes, I actually did something and that changed something. And that makes me feel great again a little bit. Hopefully they feel great all the time. And then once these seem too easy for you, or you're at 100% coverage of this, so maybe more on the level where we are at, you are tracking other coverage, such as test coverage, or how large a percentage of the vulnerabilities that are disclosed to you are not actually disclosed to you externally, but internally because of automated tests that we're running. Mean time to detect or mean time to repair of any such bug resulting out of this, right? If we detect the bug in CI, all the better. If we detect it because somebody's participating in our bug bounty program 6 months after that change was deployed, not so great. Probably the outages due to security incidents, again, makes most sense if you do track a red score for everything. And then you can also try to visualize the risk reduction that you work on. So I was mentioning this, you work on a risk matrix together with your leadership. They have to buy into it. You can come up with it. They probably have only a little bit input to it, but they have to own it themselves, which means they have to acknowledge not only its existence, but also feel like they contributed to it. So at that point that you have that matrix and you're trying to build it out further, or rather to mitigate anything that's in there, you would want to visualize how you minimize risk over time by applying colors to a spreadsheet, if you will, right? This is all not rocket science and visualization. That is all I wanted to talk about. I am running out of time. I have a dog picture for you. It's our office dog. He's amazing. He's really a cat. And then I wanted to say thanks to a couple of people that I've learned a lot from, or that have kicked my ass to come to this conference. And I would like to use how many minutes? Out of time minutes for any questions.
There's time for 1 or 2 quick questions before closing ceremony starts. So use the opportunity. It's the last one you have.
This is not particularly a question. Maybe I have misunderstood you, but this is now the second time during this conference I recognize a talk where people are advised to have some general positiveness for people. So, but actually I want to oppose that. So if I'm a developer and something I wrote is really completely crap, I don't want to be talked into, well, this is nice, thank you for a wonderful code, you could enhance it a little bit. I just want to be said
right.
Honestly.
Yeah, I get your idea.
How people think about that.
So I am absolutely not advising that you lie to anyone. We're never lying to anyone. If the code is crap, then I would say right now in our organization, this would already be determined by one of your teammates, or your tech lead, or your engineering manager, likely by all of them. So especially after onboarding, you get to deploy code in your first day of engineering onboarding, not your very first day, but you do so as a group, right? You have code review, you have peer review, and this is where these questions come up. I think the questions that would come up to our level would be more related towards, we have a problem designing this iframe content thing. So we were thinking, we're not doing iframes anymore, we're gonna go do client-side encryption via JavaScript inclusion, right, for a payment transaction. And that is one like, oh God, this introduces so much more pain, right? But then you work with them through what that actually means, right? Why does it introduce pain? Could we make this pain any more minimal, right? Like these questions oftentimes come up before the code change. Even if they come up after the code change, we're barely ever debating the quality of the code itself. Like this will have come up by somebody else. As I said, we're being brutally honest, but being brutally honest also means that I know shit about payments, right? Like, what do I know about Scala code? I write a little bit of Scala code. I know nothing about Clojure code. I do feel like if I read something and it's not readable, it might as well be my fault, right? Like, I'm going to approach it with the positive mindset of they did their best. What is it that they're good at? Like, what did we hire them for? And I presume somebody did well in the interviewing process and did hire somebody who's smart.
You stressed the importance of success metrics in security. Your metrics seem to be more on the defense side, like how much code do we cover and these kind of things. Have you thought on the other side about success metrics on the assessment side or the scanning side? Like, how can you measure the success of an assessment? Because every vulnerability that has not been found is not known.
Yeah, I think there's a general problem with the whole, like that also goes for the anti-abuse team. If we didn't see it, is it there? Is it not there? Like it's really hard to measure, which is why so many security teams are like KPIs, and not even going there. I would say a large reason for us tracking them is to make this purpose visible, right? Like, why are we doing this? We're doing it because of this. And there are a lot of things that we spend a lot of time on, for example, education, that are hard to measure, that we're not measuring, right? When I say that many people have gone through our educational program, did they learn something? Does that tell me anything about how good I was at purveying whatever the topic of my workshop was? Probably not. There was another talk, I believe, at this conference that addressed that topic specifically. But yeah, I think this is rather saying it's hard, they are hard. That doesn't mean that just because it's hard, you're like, no, I'll just not do any KPIs. I think you should still try. Sometimes, actually, people on my team came up with great KPIs, right? Actually, my teams are awesome, right? They come up with all of the shit and I just present this. Because they like going on vacation more than going on conferences. Does that answer your question a little bit? Like, so I think that maybe we can talk about afterwards to see whether we can come up with any measures for the success of an assessment. But yes, I do agree most of our measures are very defensive and more along the lines of, did we do all of this? Because it's really hard to do the opposite. What didn't we do?
Okay. That's it. Thank you, Astera.
Thanks.